morning. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Christine Levens. I am the Vice President of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber and President of the Northeast Minneapolis Chamber. Welcome to today's Town Talk webinar. Title of today's Town Talk webinar is Too Local to Fail, COVID-19 Impacts on the Creative Sector. Chamber Town Talk is a program of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber focused on issues that are affecting business, allowing our members and community to have access to folks and issues that are sharing information about things that are impacting us. We invite you to engage with us in social today. As you can see on this whole slide, we do have our handle, the Northeast Minneapolis Chamber, and our hashtag today is Northeast Town Talk. We encourage you to engage. For those of you who are just joining, again, your audio and video functions are turned off. We will have a Q&A session. If you look at your bottom toolbar, you can submit those questions at the bottom, and you're welcome to do so as the conversation progresses. Our goal today is to create an organic conversation, so your engagement will be essential to doing that. Okay, let's dive into our program. We want to thank our sponsors. Let's introduce our panelists. Sorry. Today we have Carla Tia Swanson and Wendy Holmes and Guggenheim as our speakers today. They're going to discuss several things with us, including kind of the landscape of the impact on COVID-19 in terms of the creative sector, some of the resources that are available, and some of the activations that have happened in the creative sector in response to this environment. As I began to say, we do have some sponsors of this series. Those sponsors are CenterPoint Energy and Wells Fargo. They have been supporting this series for about a decade, allowing us to bring this type of content to you now in a very virtual setting. So with that, I would like to start the conversation, and I would like to turn this over to Guggenheim, who is the Director of Office in Arts and Culture and the Creative Economy of the City of Minneapolis. Let's get started. Welcome.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you, Christine, and the Chamber for inviting me here to talk a little bit about the creative sector. I'm just going to go over a little bit about the sort of high-level overview of how the sector has been impacted by COVID, and then talk a little bit about what the City of Minneapolis does before handing over to my colleagues, my fellow speakers. I think our efforts here are just to inform people about current conditions. Obviously, none of us are really know what the future holds, but we are trying to do as much planning as we can to anticipate issues as they come up. But just to give you a little bit of an idea of where we are with the sector right now, since March 15th, closures were announced by the governor. Entertainment venues, museums, theaters, book launches, festivals, events, and other types of creative sector activities that bring people together have been closed and are likely to remain closed until social distancing rules are removed. So I'm going to break this down. What that means is that revenues for these organizations are severely impacted. And I'm going to break down what these organizations are. When I say the word these organizations, what do I mean? I'll break it down into nonprofits, businesses, and self-employed creatives. So for the nonprofit part of the creative sector, the picture is indeed grim. Our national data shows that we will lose 10% of nonprofits after the pandemic is over, and that's a national current impression. Obviously, that number may change or will change with time. Locally, the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits just released a report showing that the arts are #1 in economically stressed nonprofits. I'm quoting from them when they say on average arts organizations in Minnesota receive half in their total revenue through ticket sales and special events. So as we talked about, the closures have affected those. And then 1/3 from charitable giving, largely corporate giving. Social distancing and large group gatherings cancelled to slow the viral spread, leads to financial challenges and operational disruptions. So cancelled special fundraising events have been another point of pain for nonprofits, while revenue from special fundraising events are also, which accounts for 9% of total revenues across nonprofits, have been affected. So arts organizations are not only financially impacted by the cancellation of live performances, but also are impacted by the cancellation of special fundraising events. In Minneapolis alone, 58% of nonprofit revenues are contributions and gifts, and 38% in programs and events. So that tells you how serious this is. Our top revenue generators are theaters, and overall, our nonprofit sector in a good year, our data is from 2016, delivered 346 million in revenues. So in terms of sales and the way in which the city and government benefits from sales, this is the sort of cost that we are paying for not, for the closures and the impacts on nonprofits. So while the picture looks bad, in particular for those nonprofits with fixed overhead costs and thin financial reserves, so before the pandemic, there were some nonprofits that hadn't fully recovered from the 2008 recession, and we were seeing some nonprofits closing because they were struggling in terms of revenues. So now those are the ones in greatest danger. Estimates are in that in less than 3 months, we are likely to lose 68% of nonprofits. And that by 6 months, so I'll go back. Predictions are that 68% of arts nonprofits will be in crisis within the next 6 months, not 3 months. And meanwhile, we are likely to have these organizations, as I mentioned earlier, be the last to get back to business. So it's very concerning. The picture is similar for the for-profit sector. In terms of a healthy economy, this sector were producing revenues of about 5 billion. That's our 2016 data, and that's 9 times greater than sports. So it was doing very, very well, with the largest producers being advertising, publishing, design, and media. So immediate impacts are still coming in on how these particular parts of the sector have been hit. But one thing to think about in terms of this sector is that similar to the nonprofit sector, many of the for-profit part of arts and culture are also in hibernation. So they're not businesses that are necessary, like retail is necessary and food production is necessary, or childcare. They're also in hibernation. It's also important to understand that the significant number of sales in this sector are from small entrepreneurs, micro businesses, and gig workers. So gig economy is a very important part of the creative sector. Some studies, national studies, have shown that 75% of the gig economy is creative economy. So it's quite a high percentage. And gig economy workers have lost their livelihood in one fell swoop. So those that had multiple income streams have lost all of those income streams. National figures are showing that 62% of creative workers are unemployed. 95% have lost all income out of that 62. And 80% have no COVID plan. So 80% post-COVID plan, meaning they don't have plans on how they're going to move forward. In Minneapolis, that's 22,000 workers, which is about 5% of our employment locally. And if we take that 62% as being true, we're impacted at the number of about 13,000 workers who are unemployed. Those numbers are backed up by the data from DEED. It shows that artists and designers and architects are one of the top 4 unemployment applicants for unemployment insurance. So dire news, I'm afraid, and very concerning. I'm going to now do a little bit of transition into what my office has done in terms of helping through cash resources. So we've been thinking about this in terms of immediate needs. So triage, helping people get through the first few months of the pandemic and providing people with cash resources. In terms of working with nonprofits, my office has partnered with the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council to contribute to their emergency relief efforts. This particular fund supports organizations with budgets under $400,000. And the amount of the fund is about $2,500. That fund is continuing to receive support. I understand the last time I looked, the fund was at capacity, so they had received more applications than available resources, but I also understand that there may be more resources coming, so people should go look there for sure. I also work with the Minneapolis Foundation to ensure that this fund receives some dollars, and I was happy to see that they did go ahead and do that. We've also worked with Springboard for the Arts through their emergency relief resources, and Carl will talk in more detail about what those resources are and how to access them. And these resources are for self-employed creative workers. And we were thrilled to be able to do that. And I believe the Minneapolis Foundation joined us in that as well as many other local organizations and regional funders. So we've tried to concentrate our efforts in the areas that we were predicting were going to be the hardest hit. That said, I do know that there has been a tremendous response to both of those funds. However, they do continue to raise money in order to continue to support people. The City of Minneapolis in general has provided resources through Minneapolis Gap Funds for housing. And this is targeted to low-income households with at and under 30% AMI. There's also business relief programs through community planning and economic development, business development area under a number of efforts. So forgivable, no interest small business loans. There's cash there for up to $10,000, 0% loan programs up to $75,000. These require a lending partner with a match, but also self-employed workers are eligible. The last time I checked again, these particular resources had received more applications than they could serve, and we're still processing those applications. But it's definitely worth checking back in because I know the city has also launched an effort to raise money through private funders in order to continue to serve folks. The important thing to know is that we've also coordinated with local and national funders. So with Hennepin County, for example, and with the Local Initiative Support Corporation and various other agencies that are providing resources for businesses as well as for nonprofits. So I would continue to check back into the City of Minneapolis Business FAQ website for businesses. And I also have a newsletter which I publish regularly, which consolidates all of that information for both for-profit and nonprofit businesses as well as individuals. My newsletter information will be provided here, and I can also provide links to the City of Minneapolis websites. In terms of other types of support, we are really also recommending people seek out technical assistance. So the data I quoted earlier, that creatives don't have a plan during COVID, let alone post-COVID, for how to pivot into the new reality that we're all dealing with. And in order to provide some help, my office is having regular weekly clinics with free technical assistance. So I am available every Friday morning for anyone who would like to set up an appointment with me. I also have made available Brenda Kazar, who is a local economic specialist. She also was the executive director of NEMA and is also is an expert in local creative economics. So I would suggest that she's available on Wednesdays, and I highly recommend checking in with both of us in order to discuss your particular issue, because everyone is dealing with their own individual situation. And so we can help direct you to local resources that are relevant for you and help you avoid digging away at mountains of information. Other thing to note is that my office has also partnered with Springboard. I highly recommend going to their technical assistance program, which has been funded by the ETAP program. The city has a business technical assistance program, and these are Minneapolis resident artists. You can get information from their career advisors. And also the city has a small business team through community planning and economic development that can help you navigate based on your specific needs. And through that team, you can also learn about other technical assistance providers, because what's been great about that particular program is they have collaborated to refer you to other providers if they can't serve you. So to try to save you having to dig around and look for other resources. I'm going to stop at that. There's a lot that I haven't shared with everyone, such as the national resources at the NEA, at the Institute for Museums and Library Services, and the Humanities Council. There's a lot to really share. And I'd rather than go over a long list of what's out there, I'd rather just answer people's questions. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Carl, who from Springboard for the Arts, who can tell you more about the work that they've been doing.
Thanks so much, Gulgun. My name is Carla Tia Swanson. I'm the Associate Director of Operations and Communications at Springboard for the Arts. My pronouns are he and him. I'm delighted to be here today. I wish we were talking about other brighter subjects, but this is the moment that we're in, and this is the moment we're stepping up to respond to. The picture that Gulgun painted is accurate. It is really dire for arts organizations, for-profit and nonprofit, for independent artists, creative workers, and culture bearers. We had a moment, very literally, March 12th and 13th, where we watched everybody's work that they had lined up, that they had set up for the year to make a living, essentially disappear as festivals were canceled, performances were canceled, art fairs were canceled. And most artists who make a living and a life through the arts do so by piecing together a lot of different opportunities. So workshops, teaching in schools, all those things disappeared as well. So it really was a wholly unprecedented moment for our independent arts workers and creative workers. Springboard for the Arts, we're a nonprofit, artist-led community and economic development organization. And so we work with artists to make a living and a life, and with communities to engage artists around creative projects. And one of our long-standing programs is an emergency relief fund. We've run it for a decade plus now. And as we saw this pandemic coming, we moved some of our funds into the emergency relief fund, and then really have worked to expand that opportunity and continue to get resources out to Minnesota artists and creative workers across the state. We put in $10,000 of our budget and March 12th and 13th, and that went in the first day or two, and since then have fundraised and now have a goal of getting $1 million out to Minnesota artists and creative workers by July 1st. So far, we've funded just over 1,100 independent artists across the state with almost $600,000. And this is a response that we see as a short-term, as a bridge to getting people rent and groceries and support they need now, while other resources come online, while people refigure out their careers and what they're going to do with their creative time. And it's something that we worked to seed across the state and across the country. So we have this emergency relief fund. We've released a toolkit for it so that other people can replicate it. We're in conversation with people running emergency relief funds across the country, organizing knowledge and organizing resources so we can build for something better in the future. And locally, we have translations of the Emergency Relief Fund in Spanish, Hmong, and Somali so that they can be accessible to populations across the state. We continue to take applications, and it is a resource that is available to artists. And we define that broadly, from people who sing in choirs to people who show in galleries to knitters and felters and community engaged artists and art workers and culture bearers. So if you have an artist in your life who needs something right now, the Emergency Relief Fund is a support that's there for them. As part of our work too, we continue to aggregate resources and to share them. If you go to our website, springboardforthearts.org/coronavirus, there's a big page that links to a lot of different resources for individuals, organizations, and also mental and health resources, basic needs resources, as well as legal resources. One of the key areas of support for creative workers, independent contractors, has been the expansion of unemployment insurance and pandemic unemployment assistance. The state indeed has had to build that plane while we're flying it, while receiving various levels of direction from the federal government as to what it should look like. And we've been working to help navigate that and help independent contractors navigate that system. So we have Q&A with Iverson Felsheim, a legal firm, FAQ on the page to help people navigate unemployment insurance and pandemic uninsurance assistance for independent contractors. And like Lagoon mentioned, we do have a career of artists, career consultants. It's a core part of our work around making a living and a life for artists, is helping people figure out their next steps, their next career steps, what they want to do. And that's only become more important now as the entire equation of how people make a living and a life as an artist has radically shifted. We've brought on specific expertise around legal questions, financial planning, and website and web design so that artists, creative workers, culture bearers can access that kind of direct support and inputs as they figure out how to move part of their practice online or reimagine what they're doing, questions about legal ramifications of streaming, those sorts of things. We can help artists navigate those kinds of questions. And the ACC, the career consultant roster, is really broad and diverse, representing all sorts of disciplines, geographies of Minnesota, cultural backgrounds, so that people can find a career consultant who matches their work, matches their desires, and gets them to where they need to be. And we keep that accessible through a sliding scale, and we have a partnership with the City of Minneapolis Business and Technical Assistance Program to specifically fund artists in Minneapolis to get that kind of career consultations. And so people can drop in with a specific question or set up time multiple times to talk about ongoing projects and really get people support right now. And that's a big part of the work that we're doing, is around not just what are specific tangible and material supports for people, but how are we making sure that people feel seen in their work, people feel like they're connected to community. We have moved a lot of our regular workshops and professional development programming online as well. So we have a calendar of events that has Zoom meetings and webinars just like this. Tomorrow, if you're interested, in partnership with Slam Academy and the American Composers Forum, the rapper, the lovely, hilarious, exuberant rapper Noordi is going to give a webinar around streaming and monetization online for streaming concerts. So that's a thing that's coming up tomorrow, and we have more workshops online planned. And one of the big challenges in this moment is that artists, especially independent artists and creative workers, often fall into multiple categories. They may be part-time W-2 employees and then make a lot of independent and then work as an independent contractor. They reside both in the nonprofit and the for-profit sectors. You know, they play at venues that are for-profit. They teach in nonprofit settings. And the systems that we built around how to support people are often based around categories of legal legibility and don't take into account that people exist in multiple categories or maybe small and are micro businesses, so they don't have a property and pay property tax, but they add value to the city by building community through sales tax, through other employment methods and measures. So really what we're looking at in this moment is how do we have all these systems, and how can we help people both navigate them, but then also reimagine those systems to become more inclusive of the way that people actually work. the fact that we didn't have any kind of unemployment insurance or safety net around gig workers just doesn't match up with the way that work and labor has looked for the last 20 plus years. So we're in this moment where our pandemic and disaster emergency measures need to adapt and then become stronger measures for what we do going forward. Artists will always make art. That is a wonderful thing about them, but that's not a sufficient standard for recovery or for expecting to have a creative economy and a vibrant city. And we're excited in this moment because we have seen so many positive examples of mutual aid, of people stepping up, of people changing their resources to adapt to the moment. And I'll pass it off to my colleague, Wendy Holmes, who's the Senior Vice President of Consulting and Strategic Partnerships at ArtSpace, who they have adapted their consulting practice to then meet the needs of where people are right now. So over to you, Wendy.
All right, thank you, Carl. ArtSpace has a symbiotic relationship with Springboard. They were a tenant of ours until recently when they sprung into their new space on University Avenue in St. Paul. So it's thrilling that they have their own space springing forward from a space that they had in one of ArtSpace's 54 buildings across the country. So we are a nonprofit developer and owner and manager of permanently affordable space for artists and creative businesses and families as well. And a lot of the work that we do in the consulting area focuses on nonprofit organizations. And we've been formally working with this sector for about 10 years, informally for 40 years, but more formally for about the last 10 years. And last year we had the opportunity to adapt this further by creating this tool called Adapt, which is ArtSpace development and planning tool. And it's available at artspaceprimer.org. It's focused on the needs of nonprofit arts organizations who have a space challenge. And we all know that space is critical to making art, preserving art, showing art, etc. So this is this has been a major focus of ours to help other arts organizations in achieving their goals around space. But we know that space isn't the only thing that arts organizations need help with, right? They also need help when they're working on their projects to think about leadership, what the project concept is going to be that's going to be the strongest and provide the most sustainable budget that they can have for their organization. So we help with cost analysis, we help with thoughts on location and how to evaluate that, communications, and funding, of course, both public and private funding. So this ADAPT tool, again, was developed last year through funding from the Bloomberg Foundation and has helped us even further formalize our work with nonprofit arts organizations. So as a result of that and a result of the times, we thought we need to be able to step up our game in helping more organizations across the country. So we have offered pro bono technical assistance and coaching for the last 6 weeks, and we've received 67 inquiries. It started slow with about 3 or 4 a week, and then after the Minnesota State Arts Board put out an announcement about our pro bono services, we had the floodgates opened, and we're delighted to say that the majority of these organizations that we're working with are from Minnesota, many of them within the Twin Cities. But we've also heard from arts organizations in 5 other states, on the mainland US and in Puerto Rico as well. So the kinds of things that we're helping organizations with include evaluating their capital and operating budgets, evaluating their project priorities and strategies. They're going to have to change their strategies and change their priorities. So how can we help them adapt? Reviewing fundraising materials and communications around that. Coaching them on how to approach donors at this time. Many people are afraid to pick up the phone or pick up the Zoom and contact funders, that even those that they have relationships with. And they shouldn't be afraid, because people want to hear from arts organizations and organizations in general at this time, so that they, especially the funders, so that they're more aware of what's going on in the field. And we've been helping with doing a specific thing that is not related to space, but is related to helping organizations, what we're calling stress test their budgets. And by stress testing, we're really talking about how we can help them design a hypothetical operating scenario to help forecast and look at potential shortfalls and develop strategies around different scenarios. So this has become a very popular thing. And you can see that in our pro bono services that I believe is going to be shared with you, our newsletter that features that. That also talks about the budget stress testing that we're doing. So we're recognizing right now that that is a particular service that may be of more interest now at this time. And so I wanted to be sure to put that out there as well. All right, I am done with my remarks, and we'll turn it back over to Christine.
Thank you. Just be a minute here. We'll bring back William and Carl, and we'll open the Q&A session. As you can, please use the Q&A section that's on the bottom. You see two little bubbles there. We welcome you to share and bring some ideas forward. As mentioned in the comments, we will share a recording of this video, as well as the resources that we've been populating in the chat function during the duration of the webinar. So we'll share that with you, and you can share it with others. A couple of questions that I have kind of generated as we wait for others to chime in, who perhaps they're shy. You're all providing a variety of services to help support the creative sector. Is there any consensus about a primary need that folks are having, or is it just because the sector is so diverse that the needs are just that varied? Can you provide some comment on what you're seeing, and if you think there's a trend in particular?
I can tell you what I think. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go
I was just going to say, I think when this first started, Carl and I talked a lot about the need for unemployment insurance to include creative, because at that time we weren't aware that there was going to be unemployment insurance for gig workers. And knowing what we know about the creative sector, that was our biggest issue immediately. Luckily, the federal, we could also do some lobbying at the local and federal level, along with other cities, and that money was released in the last CARES Act, and that money continues to be there. Hopefully, we're very worried about that money going away, especially as this drags out, because again, as I mentioned, this is going to be the sector that's probably going to be the last to go back to business, and whatever that back to business looks like in the future, it's going to have to be shifted. So that was the biggest urgency for us. I think now we look to nonprofits, to the issue for nonprofits as being a bigger concern, since this new information came out, and also we've learned that the money has been slow in coming from the federal government. So 75 million was set aside for nonprofits in the last CARES bill. That money filtered through the National Endowment for the Arts. It's now at the State Arts Board, and we believe that in June, the State Arts Board will begin to disperse those funds. We're still waiting to hear from Arts Midwest, which is our regional funder, what the conditions look like. And we do know that there's been a collaboration of local foundations, and yet very little has trickled down to nonprofits from foundation money. I was happy to hear today that the Bush Foundation was committing $250,000 for a 3-state area, knowing that the arts were really suffering. So I'm happy to see that. However, I think we need to really think about a nonprofit community right now. Anyone want to add anything?
I was going to add, oh, sorry, Carl. I was going to add that I don't know if I can say that I know fully what the trends are, but based on the conversations that we've had so far with nonprofit arts organizations, helping those organizations and their leaders come up with different scenarios for how they might proceed into the future, and even looking at sort of making them or having them come to grips with the worst case scenarios so that they're prepared for that mentally. We have found that it's a very emotional thing right now. And some people are afraid their organizations are going to die. While at the same time, many of them are innovating to a level where they've never innovated before. So you see both extremes happening at the same time, which is really challenging and interesting at the same time. But having leaders come to grips with what would they do if they had to close the doors is a good exercise we have found for them to take, even though they hope, and we hope that that is not the case, because then it's easier to kind of back away from that and say, okay, what's this middle range course that we might take that's not everything, but it's also not death.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. The short answer is that needs are capped. And how can we get more money to more people in more ways? And as this has progressed, figuring out both how to focus equity in the recovery efforts and how to take care of some nuance in the recovery efforts. I mean, for example, in the pandemic unemployment assistance and unemployment insurance, you can either get pandemic unemployment assistance or you can get unemployment insurance. So if you're a creative worker who has a W-2 job, but it's only a part-time job, you can get unemployment insurance from that job, but not the pandemic unemployment assistance. And so again, sort of tailoring policy and advocating for policy that really encompasses how people live and how people work, I think is the sort of next steps. And recognizing that arts businesses are different than other stores or the places where it's easy to work from home. Which is why Americans for the Arts is doing national lobbying, the National Independent Venues Association, where First Ave is helping lead up that charge or leading up lobbying for venue spaces. So really figuring out how do we tell the stories of our nuanced creative lives, and then really centering the fact that this pandemic has both directly affected minority populations more strongly and with more force than other populations. African Americans are dying at a higher rate of COVID-19 because of structural inequity. And the funding and recovery resources, while they're slow in coming, that also means that they're exacerbating structural inequities that existed before the bottom fell out of our economy, which was already tenuous to begin with. So, for example, the NEA, that round of funding that's coming from them is going to previous grantees. And so if you have not been a previous grantee, you're still excluded from that system. So what are the mechanisms at local, state, federal levels to really center equity and really get more money to more people and reimagine what our economy looks like for the future?
Thank you for those remarks. Wendy, you referred to nonprofits that are innovating. What are some of the unique innovations that you've seen to date? If you have some anecdotal information for us from any of you to kind of share how people are pivoting.
Well, there's so many. One that just pops to my mind is one that's happening on Long Island right now, where artists are doing a series of murals on the sides of buildings and garages along a straight path, along a bike trail on Long Island. And it's curated, and you can go to your phone and you can hear more information about the artists and then be linked to places where you can be in contact with those artists. That is one of them. Many people are taking their programs, of course, online and trying to figure out now, I think the next step is how to monetize that. There's been so much free content out there, which is fantastic. But at some point, those arts organizations can't survive on free content. And I'm sure Carl and Gugan, you've seen many examples too.
Well, there's a local example. We've seen NEMA take Artworld online, and I'm really hopeful that that's going to be really good for that organization, that it will keep sustaining those artists, those individual artists. The film festival has gone online. Again, I encourage everyone to support and go to that. On a more commercial level, a local movie theater, the Riverview. If anyone, I'm a big fan of the Riverview. one of my favorite places to see a movie, have done a special film festival where you can go buy popcorn curbside and then go home and log in and pay for a curated film festival. So people are really doing some interesting work. I guess it remains to be seen whether the revenues are as strong through that form. I'm not getting that sense. I'm just getting the sense that people are just managing to continue. But I'm not getting a sense that they're sort of really making it. But Carl, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, and this pandemic really exacerbates the trend over the last decade plus, where online revenues, online streaming and online content has really eaten into the revenue streams of artists of all kinds, whether they're musicians putting streaming online, whether it's, you know, writers, where there's just so much available online content that payments for articles, payments for reviews have just disappeared. And so many artists, because so much content is available online, it becomes a loss leader, and then they make money doing touring all the time, selling merch, going out and doing readings, doing performances, doing workshops. And now that the bottom has fallen out of all those things now and won't come back for a while, that really is the question, is now, will people value or find ways to pay for things online in a new way? I do feel like the other side of that, and from our experience, we do a lot of workshops, a lot in partnership with libraries, so in physical spaces, but we're finding that so many more of our workshops are now attended from people around the state and around the country because they are online. So that growth in new audiences and accessibility, I think, has been really interesting, and will be one of the other trends that we continue to monitor. How are we getting resources? How are we getting information out to people in a much more broad way that meets people's accessibility needs?
Yeah.
I think one thing to note is the way in which the sector is really tied into other sectors. So, for example, advertising and photography obviously are connected. And photographers that I've spoken to said that in the last recession, they could still go to weddings and take photographs, even if other revenue streams had dried up. And now the total wipeout of everything has created a scenario where they can't be reliant on other forms of revenue. So insofar as, businesses have marketing plans or plans to, revamp websites, etc., I would encourage folks to continue to do those, plan for those, because creatives are going to be behind that work. So the creative infrastructure supports all kinds of retail and all kinds of other types of commerce here. And that's really where the bulk of the revenues lie.
And sit down with an artist career consultant to talk about that kind of business planning. Take the work of art workshops that we offer to help think about what those structures look like now. All
plugs are allowed here. This kind of a segue that I'm interested in. As a chamber, business focused, but also focused on, arts and the collective of our economy. Have you seen some creative partnerships between kind of a traditional business and what's going on kind of in the creative sector as this has progressed in terms of either support or learning moments as we kind of move through? And if not, what should we be doing?
My favorite example of this right now is the Black Heart of St. Paul, which is a queer soccer bar in the Midway neighborhood, which has started doing drag curbside takeout of their food. So they've put their drag performers to work doing curbside food delivery. And it's hilarious and lovely, and people get jobs, and people get delicious food, and it makes the best of this awful situation. But that's my favorite creative business partnership.
That's a really cool one. I've seen a bunch of coffee shops in different markets also promote different nonprofit arts organizations different weeks, and then give the half of the proceeds to those organizations. So there's a nice linkage between food and arts for sure, and coffee among them.
Also seeing a proliferation of podcasts and other sort of joint branded content between businesses and creatives. Often, frankly, those are businesses where creatives are employed, and so there is a natural relationship there. But it's not to say that your business doesn't have a story to tell in this moment. And so, are there people who in your network who can help share what you're doing, share how you're adapting.
Thank you. Wendy, I have a question that's rather specific to you, knowing that ArtSpace has a significant presence in Northeast Minneapolis. How do you think this current environment may affect development? Because we have a lot of housing that's being built with artists and working space in mind, and situations that artists and creatives are facing in terms of retaining their space. Do you have any insight into what that might happen? I mean, that impacts the city most certainly.
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball on that one. In the short term, development is still continuing, and fortunately, the construction business is still going, right? And so our project, for example, in North Minneapolis, which is under construction, is still under construction, thankfully, and that will be a home to 100 artists and their families. So that's a big deal. In terms of future-oriented development, like the next stage of what we plan to do at Northrop King, fortunately, the resources are still out there in Congress and at the state level for affordable housing and for economic development. Though we're always watching what's going to change, how will this pandemic impact those resources. I imagine in affordable housing, there may be more resources in the future. However, it may be more competitive to get those resources as developers go back to the way to what happened after the last Great Recession, and more of the for-profit developers got into the affordable housing business and it became more competitive. So that is one of the trends that I see. If you're interested in trends that are happening in commercial real estate, we're hosting a webinar on May 20th at 1 p.m. Central Time with a commercial broker that is focused on the nonprofit sector, in particular in Minneapolis and in Memphis and in Detroit, and they're going to have a three-way conversation about the impact of that, or what's happening in the commercial real estate and the trends that they see.
Thank you. I have one question broadly for all of you, and I think we're all asking this of ourselves. What do you think we will learn from this particular moment in time, and how might things change on the other side based on the systemic things that we're bearing witness to as we talk about unemployment and how funding is coming from different spaces? What are some of the things that we might learn and see on the other side? I'm not sure who wants to go first, but it's kind of what are the learning moments that we're having right now?
If no one's willing, I can go first. Well, as Carl already mentioned, we're seeing the fissures widen. So we already knew that the sector was on shaky ground. So if, going back to that statistic around creative workers being mostly in the gig economy. And we know nationally, the gig economy doesn't have much of a support structure, if any. So not just in unemployment insurance, but then health insurance and other types of benefits. We really need to rethink that at a national level. And it will have fantastic impacts on the creative sector, because I don't think artists are going to change how they work. I think they will continue to have multiple income streams. Again, my biggest worry is people's ability to make a living and a life. This has just been stark. And as we come out of this, I think just contract work and freelancing will just continue. It will, as businesses are going to be getting back on their feet, they're not going to be employing. At the city, for example, we have a hiring freeze. I'm sure that's the same with many other large employers. So we're just not going to get back to the employment level, and a lot of things will be on contract. So I think as a huge structural shift we could all do ourselves a favor around is to figure out supports for gig economy workers. I'm going to stop at that, but there are others, and I'm going to let others take the other parts over.
I'll say just a few words. I don't have the answer here, but I do think that because of the great fissure that there is between organizations that have been well funded in the past and organizations that have not been well funded in the past. That growth of difference between the bigs and the littles will just continue to get bigger and bigger. I think we have a responsibility, particularly the city, Springboard, and ArtSpace as service organizations that work with multiple cities and multiple organizations and artists, to always bring organizations led by people of color and women and Indigenous folks to the table. And I think that now it's even more important than ever, and we just have to do it. Because the sector and the differences between who has and who doesn't have will continue to grow unless we play a huge role in that.
Yeah, I mean, I wholly echo both of those statements. I've been thinking a lot about this since we really shut everything down at the beginning of March. I am of a generation where my first semester of college was 9/11, and then came into the real workforce during the recession, and now in a working position during this pandemic, and just living through and having an adult working life that has been marked by the sort of steady erosion of other social networks and social safety nets. What the pandemic has really shown is that all the hypothetical situations that we might have thought of about the economy shutting down are not hypothetical. They're very real situations. And what I take a lot of heart from is the mutual aid and collaborative spirit and people coming together to make changes so that we do not go back to a system that was not working well for everybody. And what we learn from this too is that there are political and social forces that just want us to get back to usual and get back to it and not think about these things and not think about building new safety nets. I keep on thinking about the moral arc of the universe bending towards justice, which is true, but only if you're pulling it that way. And so this is a moment to be pulling that way.
I'd like to add something to what Wendy and Carl has already said as well, in that I think we need to also rethink the way we're funding arts. We know that there's going to be a huge decline in sales tax, and therefore that's going to result in a decline in the legacy amendment money, at least 20%, if not more. So one thing we've done is put a lot of our store in that kind of revenue for nonprofit organizations, which has also led to the larger organizations with the larger budgets receiving a lot more of the share of those funds. And as Wendy pointed out, those who have less have less. I'd like to get to a point, and I'm going to quote Wellstone, where when we all do better, everyone does better, where we've figured out ways in which arts and culture can become more of a fabric of how we do our business. And nonprofits are part of that too. So that we can look for ways of resourcing arts in maybe community development projects or in commercial work or in better partnerships with businesses. That's the way I see is a new way forward, because that's where, for me, sustainability lies. And I think the words sustainability and equity are the two big words I'm carrying with me, because that's what I've heard from talking with many individuals and organizations and businesses, that they would like to get to a point where they're not scrabbling for crumbs, and that they can actually build a business and build some reserves and actually be part of a healthy economy. We haven't done that well in the creative sector, and it's time we changed.
Thank you. I think those are all really insightful comments. Just a few things for me in closure. Thanking all of you, of course, the work you're doing, the connectivity that you're creating. Normally, if we were in a room together, I would acknowledge the fact that we have one of our council members on the webinar with us today. Councilmember Reich has joined us. He's asked that I thank you all and restate that he is ready to serve as a resource and is in full support of what's going on in the creative economy, and will do what he can to help in the front of the city and any ways that we can. I'll echo that. The Northeast Chamber has always been an advocate for the artists that are in our space. We believe that every artist and every creative person is a small business, and they deserve the support and recognition as being such. And we're going to continue to share that message.